So let's take a look at the latest article from Screenrant. It's been a while since I've addressed Screenrant, and many of you in the fandom know that Screenrant is responsible for some of the biggest hot trash articles in, ever, all over the web when it comes to Dragon Ball. Screenrant's Dragon Ball coverage has been pretty damn embarrassing. So I want to look at this article here, 8 ways Dragon Ball Super is better than Dragon Ball Z, and 7 it's worse. So it's kind of like a double list. Now, this article was written by a gentleman named Jack O'Regan. I just want to say before we begin that this is nowhere close to being the worst article Screenrant has done. It's actually mostly opinionated, so I'm going to be discussing some of the things that he says and kind of giving my opinion on it, and I would love for you to leave your comments and give me yours as well. But there are some factually incorrect things here in this article that I want to address. But like I said, there are way, way worse articles that have been published on Screenrant about Dragon Ball throughout the years. And I've kind of been weary of doing a lot of debunks, but whatever. People really love the first one. I got a great response on it, so I might as well go ahead and knock this one out too. So let's go ahead and take a look at this article here. Right off the hop, the first 2 paragraphs, there's already misinformation here. He talks about how Dragon Ball Z ended in '96 and the franchise hasn't put out anything to rival its most successful series. Dragon Ball GT and a pair of animated features did little to revive the Dragon Ball brand. And amazingly, it was a certain live-action movie that sparked the franchise back to life. That's all wrong. That's literally all wrong. First of all, GT came out right after Dragon Ball Z. Right after. So this idea of it reviving the Dragon Ball brand, it's not revived if it wasn't dead. Z ended, GT started. GT, I don't know if the dude thought that GT came out later, but it started right after Z. So that's not really a revival series. And he talks about a pair of animated features referring to Battle of Gods and Resurrection F. And he talks about how it was Dragon Ball Evolution that sparked, the franchise back to life. And that's wrong. That's actually completely wrong. Dragon Ball Evolution was seen as a critical failure. It's been panned by pretty much the entire fandom, including people involved in the movie. And Battle of Gods and Resurrection F have been known financially, critically. Obviously Resurrection F wasn't the best movie, but it was still a fun movie, very successful. It was responsible for sparking the Dragon Ball fandom to kind of come back. It was the Dragon Ball Renaissance. In fact, it was a combination of Fuji TV needing a time slot and the success of Resurrection F and Battle of Gods as to why Super was even produced. So I don't know if the dude's timeline is off, but that's incorrect information. Now, again, more misinformation here. He says that in 2013, Toriyama made Dragon Ball's first feature-length animation, Battle of Gods. First of all, Battle of Gods was not the first feature-length animation. No, the first Dragon Ball feature-length animation came out in 1980, what was it, like 87 I think it was, for Curse of the Blood Ruby's Legend of Shenron. So, no, that's not the first theatrical movie, homie. It's like the 15th, I think, or 16th, 17th. So, no, not including Dragon Ball, 18th movie. So, no, that's incorrect. And he says it was a response to Dragon Ball Evolution. That's wrong. That's not what happened. Toei Animation, Bandai, and Shueisha had begun production on Battle of Gods without Toriyama's involvement. Toriyama's involvement was partially because of Dragon Ball Evolution, because he felt like he was not involved in the creative process of Evolution. That's why, or one of the reasons why it turned out to be a bad film. So when they were doing Battle of Gods, Toriyama wasn't even involved at first. Yusuke Watanabe wrote the script. It wasn't even Toriyama. Then he came in and made changes. So that, again, misinformation there. It says here that it goes without saying that Dragon Ball Super has already surpassed GT. That's up for debate, of course. I'm not going to get into that debate here. That's a different topic altogether. But let's go ahead and talk about the actual list here. 8 ways Super's better than GT. Number 15, better humor. I actually agree with this. I do agree. I think Dragon Ball Super is much better at making jokes. The baseball episode, he has it here. The Arale episode, I think Super really does have a lot more humor. And after speaking to some of the voice actors at Kamehacon, they really enjoy doing Super because it lets them be funny and not just, screaming all the time. So, yes, I do think that overall Super is funnier than Z. I think Z really does get dark sometimes. It doesn't really allow for that kind of comedy. There's still comedy, but I would say Super is more along the lines of being a comedy series than anything else. So yeah, that I do agree with that completely. He also says worse movie retreads. Now I agree with that as well. I've always felt the movie retellings were kind of unnecessary. While I do like some of the things they added into the movie retellings, I don't think they were really necessary at all, and they bogged down the first 27 episodes of Super. So I do agree with that. You know, he talks about the reintroduction of Captain Ginyu being a highlight, and I don't agree with that. I think that was botched, in my opinion. Now, he says here, callbacks to Dragon Ball. I don't like this because, again, the original Dragon Ball story, Dragon Ball NZ, are part of one big manga. So this whole, like, you know, oh, we're going back to Dragon Ball, and he says that Z is barely recognizable as a sequel to Dragon Ball. That's because it's not a sequel to Dragon Ball. It is Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball and Z are one big series, so that doesn't apply here. That's a bad choice. Very, very bad choice. Character arcs, he says, are worse than Super. I would agree with that to a degree, that Vegeta, Gohan, and Piccolo had much better arcs in Z than in Super. I feel like the Jiren arc was not the best. It wasn't as good as the Vegeta arc at all. So I do think that, yes, so far we're good. Now here I disagree. Okay, well he's saying that Super is better paced than Dragon Ball Z. I completely disagree with this, but if you disagree with me and agree with him, that's okay, because I can see your point. Dragon Ball Z is long, okay? DBZ is a long series, and it's long. There are some parts that just drag, but the pacing is at least consistently long, whereas with Super, the movie retellings were way too dragged out, and then the Trunks arc I thought was way too concise. It was too squished in, too rushed. Same thing with Universe 6. I thought those were a bit too rushed. So I feel like Super's pacing is inconsistent. Z's is consistent, but consistently slow. So, but again, that one is all about your opinion of how you feel about the series. Now, this one is kind of irritates me. He talks about Dragon Ball Z being consistently animated, and that's wrong. That's legit incorrect. We've talked about this I don't know how many times. Anime AJ has. You can't take an in-between screenshot and say Super has bad animation, because you can do that with Z as well. It's BS, and people who talk about this just don't know what they're talking about. The animation in Super is not worse. It's just that people magnetize it to be worse. Z has had just as bad animation moments as Super has. Especially in the Tournament of Power, things got a lot better. So this is more so this guy being ignorant and not really understanding how animation works. And it's become kind of a joke here that people jump to the fact that Super's poorly animated when really it's not. There are bad animated moments, don't get me wrong, but as a whole, it's really not. He writes here, stakes. The stakes in Super being better. I disagree. Bigger does not always mean better. Yes, in Super, there are universal level threats now. In Z, we didn't really get that until, Kid Buu was going around destroying all these different, planets and whatnot. He could have, wiped out the universe with some time, or at least the life on the universe. But the thing is, in Super, you don't feel any stakes because you already know the end. Because Super takes place during a 10-year time skip before the end of Z. You know that Universe 7 survives. You know that Goku meets Oob. You know Krillin and Vegeta and Bulma are all alive. So there are less stakes. I mean, and that's one thing that I think a lot of folks realize that hurt the series, that that they're going to be okay. So I disagree with that completely. Whereas if you're watching Z for the first time, never having seen Super or anything else, you don't know who's going to live or die. You just don't know. And by the end, it becomes a joke, but there you go. He says that Super is worse when it comes to transformations. I agree. I've talked about this so many times. I think that Super has too many transformations in too short of a time. I feel like in Z, transformations were a much bigger deal, right? In my opinion, of course. In Super, I feel like there's just too many of them. They don't really explain a lot of them. We still don't know anything about Trunks' rage form or Berserk from Kale. Really, the Berserk form is a little easier to explain because Universe 6. When it comes to Trunks' rage form, that one's like, okay, well, what is this? Like, we still don't know. Better fight choreography. I don't agree with this at all. I think that while Super does have a few good fights here and there, they've never been able to top on the epicness of Dragon Ball Z's fights, in my opinion. Like, there's been a few, don't get me wrong, but, and yeah, there's more Naoto Shida cuts here in the TV series, that seem to be getting more attention, but I feel like, yes, some of the choreography is great in Super, don't get me wrong. I still think that Z, especially Dragon Ball, classic Dragon Ball, still have, you know, the edge here. But that's, excuse me, that's up for debate. Sorry, I'm coughing. I'm still not over my damn bronchitis, so my bad on that. He talks about consistency, that Super's less consistent. And again, he's talking about specifically when it comes to power scaling. I feel like, yes, I kind of agree that Super has really bad... It's very hard to power scale Super in comparison to Z. Very, very hard. And I've talked to power scalers about this, and I'm talking about every power scaler that I'm friends with, from Seth the Programmer to Laughingstock Media to MJ to Private Wife. They all talk about this. Like, it's not even a joke. Like, it makes their job harder because you have transformation explanations that don't make sense in the next arc compared to the previous arc and things like that. So, yeah, I agree with that. Unpredictability, he says, better than Super. Again, disagreed. There is some things that are unpredictable in Super. Yes, I agree with that completely. However, we know what the end game's going to be because it's before the end of Z. So that's always going to be a thing where the stakes and the predictability factor are going to be hurt by it. But I do think that they've given us enough twists in Super to where we can say, okay, I kind of see where he's coming from. I don't totally disagree on that. Number 4, Goku. That one is interesting because if you remember in Z, Goku... Toriyama had to find ways to write Goku out. You know, he dies at the beginning in the Saiyan Saga. In the Frieza Saga, he's on his way to Namek. Then he gets taken out with the Ginyu body switch thing. He has to recover. Then in the Android arc, he has the heart virus. And then he's training. And then in the Buu Saga, he's dead for half of it. So, or most of it, really. So yeah, there is more Goku in Super. Goku is at the center of attention in Super compared to Z. In Z, he really wasn't the center of attention as often as he was in Super. So... depending on your opinion on that will depend on how you feel about Super. If you don't like Goku being the center of everything, then you'll probably like Z more. And I personally like Z more because I thought they used Goku very intelligently. His arc had already been complete by the time that Dragon Ball Z had begun, you know, in Dragon Ball. So that one's up for debate. I'm not going to go either way on this one. You know what I mean? Because I kind of see it. But he's talking about how Goku has done stupid things in Super, but... and then he's less compassionate. So I like what he's saying here. I actually like what he's saying there, even though I don't fully agree with it. There are some things in Super that where Goku does a lot of questionable things. I agree with that. And maybe it did go a bit too much. Now, he mentions Tournament of Power being better. Overall, he's saying the tournaments in Dragon Ball Super are better. But remember that in Z, there really weren't that many tournaments. So that's not really a fair comparison. You know, Z only had the Buu Arc tournaments that we saw on screen, and the Otherworld tournament that was filler, right? So they're just not, it's just an unfair comparison, and I still feel like the tournaments in Dragon Ball, especially the 22nd and 23rd, are still some of the best arcs in all of Dragon Ball, like ever. Like, I feel like the Tournament of Power was fun, but that 23rd tournament with Goku and Piccolo is still like a step above everything, in my opinion. You know, just the writing was great there. My opinion, of course, like I say, I don't think that's really fair to compare those. Impact. Now, this is stupid. I think this is a dumb thing to put on the list. You can't sit there and say that compare the impact of Dragon Ball Z to Dragon Ball Super, because Dragon Ball Super branches off of Dragon Ball Z. So you just can't compare it. I mean, that's like saying that's like saying The Force Awakens can't have more impact than A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie, because it came, you know, like, because it came out after. Like, you can't say that. Like, it wouldn't be big if it wasn't for Z. Nobody would care about Super if it wasn't for Z. So that's dumb. Like, that shouldn't even be on the list, dude. You know, like, he talks about, like, over 9,000 and the memes and all that, which I think is a terrible, terrible comparison. Terrible. And he's talking about, like, One Punch Man and Goku and Superman, which doesn't even matter in this argument. Of course Super wouldn't have the impact if it wasn't for Dragon Ball or Z. You know, and he talks about how, you know, Dragon Ball Z wouldn't exist without Dragon Ball, but in Japan, it's one and the same, dude. Like, I don't think he realizes that. And no, of course Super's not going to have the same impact as Z. But it's not supposed to. It can't. It's almost impossible for it to, because it was impactful because of Z. Or because of Dragon Ball. This one I also disagree with. Villains. He talks about, you know, how he thinks that Goku Black and Beerus or whatever are better villains. And Beerus is more of an antagonist than a villain. I don't count him. But who are the villains in Dragon Ball Super that are actual villains? Golden Frieza, which is, we've already seen Frieza and Z as a villain. He doesn't count. It's an old villain from Z. And Goku Black. Goku Black is awesome. I like Goku Black and Zamasu. I like that whole idea of an evil Kai. But, I don't know, compared to Frieza, Cell, and Buu, you know, Cell not being that interesting but having a cool backstory, and Buu having these awesome powers, I don't know if I agree with that. I think Vegeta, Frieza, Cell, and Buu are way cooler than the Dragon Ball Super villains, because think about it, all Goku Black is an evil Goku with a few extra layers on him. I don't think he's that interesting of a villain. In some ways, I think that Baby from GT is probably more interesting than most of these villains. I mean, because he actually has a beef. He actually has a reason to hate Goku and Vegeta that you can relate with. You know, with what their ancestors did to his race. It makes sense. You know, here, this guy's Goku Black Zamasu's just mad because Goku's hanging out with freaking Beerus. Like, he's mad that mortals are getting stronger, you know, so he wants to kill them. Like, he's a psychopath, I mean, obviously. But I think Goku Black is a good villain, don't get me wrong. I don't think he compares to, like, Frieza, though, in my opinion. I think Frieza's way more interesting, but, you know, if you like Goku Black, great. But overall in Super, who else is actually a villain? I mean, I don't think the Pride Troopers count, and Beerus doesn't count. Hit, I don't think counts either. It's really just Goku Black and Frieza. So and Frieza's from Z, so I don't think that really is fair. So what do you think about the Screen Rant list? Again, these guys have been known to make complete trash articles. I don't think this one is that trash compared to other ones that they've done. It's mostly opinionated, but there is some misinformation there. This guy Jacko Reagan seems to do a bit more research, but not quite enough, I don't think, than his predecessor, that dude who was saying. I don't even want to get into that one. I already did a video on it, but let me know what you think. Do you agree with the list? Do you agree with my analysis in the comments? And do you want me to do more Screen Rant coverage or Screen Rant? I don't know if you call it a debunk or what, because this was only a partial debunk. It was also me responding to it. So thank you guys. Hope you have a good one, and I hope you have a great day. I already said that, but I'll see you soon. Bye.